I still remember the exact moment I realized my new neighbor wasn't just arrogant. He was the kind of guy who genuinely believed rules were optional if he had enough money. And believe me, that realization came way too late. The funny thing is, when people hear this story now, they always think the craziest part was the lawsuit, or the revenge, or the way everything eventually blew up in his face. But that's not where it started. It started with something so small that most people would have ignored it. A single orange traffic cone. Now, before I get ahead of myself, let me explain. My name's Ryan Mercer, and for almost 10 years I've lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Lexington, Kentucky. Nothing fancy, just regular working people. Teachers, mechanics, retirees, contractors. The kind of neighborhood where folks wave when they drive past, and nobody cares if your grass is half an inch too long. After my divorce, buying that little house was one of the few things in my life that felt stable. 2 bedrooms, 1 detached garage, a decent backyard, and most importantly, a long gravel driveway running along the side of the property. That driveway wasn't just convenient. It was my livelihood. I own a small excavation and landscaping company, and every morning I'd back my truck and trailer out before sunrise, load equipment, and head to job sites around central Kentucky. Without that access lane, running my business would have been a nightmare. For years, everything was peaceful. Then the Hawthorne family moved in next door. Ethan and Claire Hawthorne. The moment they arrived, you could tell they viewed the entire neighborhood as some temporary inconvenience while they waited to move somewhere better. They bought the old Henderson house and immediately began renovating everything. New stonework, designer lighting, imported landscaping, luxury SUV in the driveway. Every week there seemed to be another contractor parked outside. Now don't get me wrong, I have absolutely no problem with people improving their property. But Ethan had this way of talking to people that rubbed everyone the wrong way. He'd smile while insulting you. You know the type. One afternoon, he walked over while I was unloading a skid steer and casually said, "You ever think about storing all this equipment somewhere else? Makes a neighborhood look a little industrial." Then he laughed like it was a joke. I laughed too, mostly because I didn't feel like arguing. Looking back, that was probably mistake number 1. Because people like Ethan don't interpret patience as maturity. They interpret it as weakness. A few months later, I walked outside one morning carrying a cup of coffee and saw 3 bright orange traffic cones sitting along the edge of my driveway, right near the property line. I figured maybe a contractor left them behind, so I moved them aside. Simple, no big deal. That evening, Ethan came walking across the lawn wearing expensive loafers and one of those quarter-zip sweaters rich guys seem to get issued at birth. He pointed toward the driveway. "Hey Ryan," he said, "Claire and I were thinking maybe we could share that section over there. We've got guests over a lot, and you've got plenty of extra room." I honestly thought he was kidding. I said, "It's not shared. That's my driveway." His smile vanished instantly. Not gradually. Instantly. Like someone flipped off a switch. For a second, he just stared at me. Then he nodded slowly. "Interesting," he said, and that's when something about his tone made my stomach tighten. Because it didn't sound like a neighbor having a conversation. It sounded like a man being told no for the first time in a very long time. As he turned to leave, he glanced toward my garage and said something I'll never forget. Sometimes ownership is a matter of perspective. Then he walked away. At the time, I thought he was just being pretentious. I had no idea that less than 2 weeks later, I'd pull into my own driveway and discover that Ethan Hawthorne had decided to solve our disagreement in the most unbelievable way imaginable. The next afternoon, I came home from a grading project about 40 minutes outside Lexington, and the second I turned onto my street, I knew something was wrong. At first, I couldn't figure out what I was looking at. Then my brain finally caught up. I slammed on the brakes. There was fresh black asphalt running across part of my driveway. Not near it, not beside it, across it. And sitting right in the middle of what had always been my access lane was a brand new cedar privacy fence. I just sat there staring through the windshield, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to understand how a grown man could possibly think this was normal behavior. The fence wasn't even close. It crossed several feet onto my property. My trailer couldn't fit through anymore. My equipment couldn't get through. The entire side entrance I depended on for work had effectively been hijacked. I got out of the truck and walked straight to Ethan's front door. No hesitation, no second guessing, just pure disbelief. Claire answered. She was holding a wine glass. Of course she was. I told her, "Your husband just built a fence on my property." She didn't even blink. Not once. Instead, she took a sip of wine and said, "Ethan had measurements done. We corrected the boundary issue." Corrected. That word hit me harder than the fence itself. Like they genuinely believed they'd done me a favor. I said, "There was no boundary issue." Her smile got tighter. "Well, apparently there was." Then she slowly closed the door in my face. I wish I could tell you I immediately exploded. I didn't. Honestly, I was too shocked. That night my kitchen table disappeared under paperwork. Property records, closing documents, tax maps, survey reports, everything. Around midnight, I finally found the original certified survey from when I bought the house. And there it was. Crystal clear. No ambiguity. No confusión. Every inch of that disputed section belonged to me. Legally. Officially. Without question. The next morning I called Ethan. The second he answered, I said, "I checked the survey. Removed the fence." He laughed. Actually laughed. Then he said, "Ryan, property lines aren't always as simple as old paperwork." I replied, "This isn't complicated. You're on my land." His voice got colder. "Then hire a lawyer." Click. Conversation over. Now here's the thing. Most people assume I immediately ran to court. I didn't, because lawsuits are expensive, time-consuming, exhausting. I still had a business to run, employees depending on me, clients waiting for jobs to get finished. So I spent the next couple weeks trying to handle things professionally. I contacted the county. I hired an updated survey inspection. I documented everything. Photos, videos, measurements, every single detail. And during that entire process, Ethan acted like he'd conquered a small country. Every morning, his luxury SUV sat parked on the section he stole, perfectly centered, like a trophy. At night, little decorative landscape lights appeared along the asphalt extension. Claire would stand outside admiring them. Meanwhile, I was squeezing trailers through reduced access points and reorganizing equipment because my workspace had literally been cut apart. The worst part wasn't even the inconvenience. It was the smugness, the constant smugness. Every interaction became a performance. One afternoon, Ethan saw me taking photographs. He walked over and said, "Still fighting that survey war?" I looked at him and said nothing. He smirked. "At some point, Ryan, you have to accept progress." Progress. That word stayed in my head all night. Because to Ethan, taking someone else's property wasn't theft. It was improvement. And that's when something shifted inside me. Not anger, not revenge, clarity, a very dangerous kind of clarity. I realized Ethan wasn't interested in compromise. He wasn't confused. He wasn't mistaken. He knew exactly what he was doing. He believed that if he acted confident enough, eventually I'd surrender simply because fighting back was inconvenient. And honestly, that strategy probably worked on a lot of people. Just not this time. A few days later, I had a mulch delivery scheduled for a commercial project. Normally, I would have stored it behind my garage. Instead, I gave the driver different instructions. Very specific instructions. I stood there holding a coffee cup while 12 cubic yards of dark mulch poured directly onto the section Ethan claimed belonged to him. The pile was enormous. Looked like a volcanic eruption had occurred overnight. 10 minutes later, Ethan came storming outside. Bathrobe, bedhead, pureraje. "What the hell is this?" he yelled. I looked at the pile, then looked at him. "I'm using my property." His face turned bright red. "You're blocking access." "No," I said calmly. "I'm using my driveway." For a second, I thought he might actually explode. Instead, he started threatening everything. Police, lawyers, civil complaints, property damage claims. Latin. I just nodded, sipped my coffee, and listened. The mulch stayed there for 3 days. 3 glorious days. Every guest visiting their house had to park down the block and walk past what became known in the neighborhood as Mount Mercer. Kids joked about it. Neighbors laughed about it. Even my buddy Mike called and asked if I'd opened a volcano-themed landscaping business. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. Because during those 3 days, Ethan kept doubling down. More threats, more arrogance, more demands, which led directly to the second delivery. And this one was much harder to ignore. The following Friday morning, A truck arrived carrying 10 tons of crushed limestone gravel. The driver backed up carefully. I pointed toward the asphalt extension, and then an entire mountain of gray stone came crashing down directly across the section Ethan had stolen. The sound alone was magnificent. It buried the black asphalt completely. SUVs weren't getting through that. Neither were guests. Neither was Ethan. 20 minutes later, police cruisers rolled onto the street. And judging by the look on Ethan's face as he marched toward them waving his arms, I had a feeling things were about to get very interesting. The older officer stepped out first. You could tell immediately he'd been doing this job for a long time. Not because of the uniform, because of the expression. That look people get after spending 20 years dealing with arguments that could have been avoided if somebody had simply acted like an adult. Ethan practically sprinted toward him. "He's harassing us," he said before the officer could even introduce himself. "He's intentionally blocking our driveway." The officer looked at the gravel pile, then at Ethan, then at me. "Is it your driveway?" he asked. Simple question. One sentence. And suddenly Ethan didn't look nearly as confident. I walked back into my house and returned with a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. Survey reports, property maps, county records, photographs, the updated inspection I paid for. Everything. The officer spent maybe 30 seconds looking through it before slowly turning toward Ethan. "I don't think you're going to like this conversation," he said. The silence that followed was beautiful. According to the county records, the disputed section belonged to me. Always had. Still did. Ethan immediately launched into an explanation. "But we improved it." The officer blinked twice. "That's not really how ownership works." I nearly laughed. Nearly. Then Ethan tried one last argument. "But he's blocking our access." And the officer looked him directly in the eye. "Then maybe you shouldn't have built access on someone else's property." That ended the conversation. Legally, anyway. Emotionally, we were just getting started. Because after the police left, something changed. For the first time since this whole mess began, Ethan looked nervous. Not scared. Not defeated. Just uncertain. Like reality had finally entered the room. But people who spend years getting their way don't change overnight. They double down. And that's exactly what he did. 2 weeks later, I was served court papers. I remember standing in my driveway reading them and actually laughing. The man was suing me. Intentional interference. Property damage. Emotional distress. Emotional distress. Apparently a gravel pile was emotionally devastating. My attorney laughed even harder than I did. Then he filed a counterclaim. Trespassing. Property encroachment. Unauthorized construction. Restoration costs. Loss of access. Legal fees. The whole package. And unlike Ethan, we had evidence. A mountain of it. Court day arrived about 6 weeks later. I showed up wearing clean jeans, work boots, and a button-down shirt. Nothing special. Ethan arrived looking like he was heading into a corporate board meeting. Expensive suit. Expensive watch. Expensive confidence. The problem was that confidence isn't evidence. And evidence was about to become a serious problem. The judge started by reviewing Ethan's claims. His attorney spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Shared access. Community usage. Property enhancement. Reasonable assumptions. A lot of fancy words. Then the judge asked one question. "Do you possess a certified survey establishing ownership of the disputed land?" Ethan smiled. Actually smiled. Like he'd been waiting for that moment. Then he handed over his documentation. The judge studied it. His eyebrows slowly climbed higher. Then he adjusted his glasses. Then he looked back down. The courtroom got quiet. Very quiet. Because Ethan hadn't hired a licensed surveyor. He hadn't hired anyone. The man had literally measured distances himself and drawn property boundaries based on landscaping features. Flower beds, trees, decorative stone borders. That was his survey. His own attorney looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Meanwhile, my lawyer calmly stood up and introduced our evidence. The certified survey, the county records, the original deed, the updated inspection, and most importantly, the licensed surveyor himself. A 70-year-old professional named Walter Simmons. Walter explained the property markers so clearly that even I learned a few things. Within 15 minutes, the entire case had collapsed. Then came the photographs. Pictures of the original driveway. Pictures of the fence crossing onto my property, invoices from the construction company, security footage showing contractors entering my land. Every piece of evidence landed like another brick on top of Ethan's defense. By the end, the judge looked genuinely irritated. And then Ethan made the biggest mistake of his life. He interrupted, right in the middle of proceedings. He stood up and said, "But we spent thousands improving that area." The judge didn't even hesitate. Improving someone else's property without permission is not a legal defense, Mr. Hawthorne. You could almost hear the air leave his body. That was it. Game over. The final ruling came shortly afterward. Complete removal of the fence. Removal of the asphalt extension. Full restoration of my property. Reimbursement of legal expenses. Additional penalties tied to unauthorized construction. Everything. Every single thing. 30 days to comply. When we walked out of that courtroom, Ethan looked 10 years older than he had that morning. And honestly, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. 3 weeks later, demolition crews arrived. Watching that fence come down was one of the most satisfying things I've ever seen. Board by board, post by post, reality undoing arrogance. The asphalt disappeared next. The decorative lights vanished overnight. Claire stopped making eye contact entirely. And for the first time in months, I could back my trailer into my driveway without maneuvering around somebody else's ego. For months later, a moving truck appeared. No announcements. No goodbye parties. No epaligi. Just boxes, furniture, and silence. By the end of the week, the Hawthorns were gone. The new neighbors who bought the house turned out to be normal people. You know, the revolutionary concept of respecting property lines and speaking to others like human beings. We wave. We exchange Christmas cookies. Sometimes we help each other move furniture. Nothing dramatic, which honestly feels pretty nice after everything that happened. But here's the part one still think about sometimes. What if I'd backed down? What if I had decided the stress wasn't worth it? What if I convinced myself keeping the peace mattered more than defending what was mine? Because that's how people like Ethan win. Not through laws, not through facts, not through fairness. They win because good people get tired. They count on exhaustion. They count on discomfort. They count on your desire to avoid conflict. And sometimes that works. Maybe that's why this story still sticks with me. It was never really about a driveway. It was about boundaries. The moment someone decides your kindness means weakness. The moment they start testing how much space they can take before you push back. So now I'm curious what you think. Did I go too far with the gravel pile? Would you have handled it differently? Or do you think some people only understand consequences when they finally run into a wall they can't push through? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. And trust me, after everything that happened with Ethan Hawthorne, I've learned that sometimes the most interesting part of a story isn't what happened. It's what people believe should have happened instead.